Welcome to U.S.-Uganda Partnership in a Turbulent Region, a conversation with Uganda's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Please welcome Joshua Meservey, Research Fellow for Africa in the Heritage Foundation's Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this live stream conversation with His Excellency Abubaker Odongo, who is the Foreign Minister for the Republic of Uganda. Really pleased that you could join us today and appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have opportunities like this because beyond talking the two of us, many people else get involved in this conversation, and I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, of course, been many negatives of the pandemic and moving to telework, but I think the explosion of sort of online events has been a small positive. So we're glad that we're able to reach so many people online today.
Yeah, of course, true. It is true. There have been many negatives, but I think one positive about the pandemic is that it has taught us that there are other ways in which we can continue conversation, apart from the physical one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a very brief introduction of you. I encourage our listeners to go look up the Honorable Minister. He's had a fascinating career. Something that I did not know about him until recently was that he was one of the original group of soldiers who kicked off the Ugandan Bush War in the early 1980s with now President Yoweri Museveni. So I hope you write a book someday. I would love to read it. You've had a fascinating life. You've held a number of ministerial level portfolios. Of course, currently you are Minister of Foreign Affairs, and so our conversation will focus today on Uganda's foreign policy, on its role in a really critical region in Africa, an important one to the United States and an important one to Africa, and of course. So I want to jump right in because we don't have a lot of time and there's much to discuss. And let's start with Al-Shabab if we could.
Sure.
So Uganda, of course, has been fighting this Somali terrorist organization for many years. It was an original member of the AMISOM peacekeeping operation that has been active in Somalia for well over a decade now. I mentioned to you earlier, I was actually in Kampala when Al-Shabaab bombed two bars during the World Cup finals. I still remember it well, and that precipitated an even larger Ugandan intervention into Somalia. So let's fast forward to today. Can you just give us your assessment of the fight against Al-Shabaab? How's it going?
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to share with you our own perspective as to what is going on in Somalia and indeed against Al-Shabaab. I think it is important to remember and to recognize the fact that we've been at it since 2007 when we first deployed into Somalia. A very difficult period indeed. But today we can say with a lot of pride and satisfaction that with the assistance of the United States, where we are much better than where we were in 2007. But going forward, I think it is important for us to recognize three main things in as far as the fight against Al-Shabaab in Somalia is concerned. One, there are military things that we must put into consideration. Two, there are political things that we must continue to put in consideration. And at this material time, I think there is a social problem that is emerging. Militarily, I think with the transition from AMISOM to ATMIS, the African Transition Mission in Somalia, new imponderables have come on board. AMISOM was a peacekeeping mission. ATMIS has a mandate more than peacekeeping, and a mandate that enjoins it to be more operational, and by so doing, there are new challenges that have come on board. And along with ATMIS, there is the challenge of taking into cognizance the fact that 24 months down the road, the mission will be closing out of Somalia. The question, therefore, is, as we do that, what is it in place in Somalia to replace this force which is getting out? So as we speak now, one of the challenges is to build capacity of the Somali military force to be able to take the responsibilities of securing their own country and ensuring that what has been achieved is maintained. We think we need to help Somalia address the question of the relationship between the federal forces and the state forces. That has not yet been very, very clear. And I think we need, as quickly as possible, to assist the Somalis to do that. That is the question, one question in as far as the military field is concerned. The other question is, by virtue of the new mandate of ATMIS, the new requirements put the soldiers on harm's way in terms of exposure to IEDs, in terms of exposure by virtue of the fact that they are not protected. So we now need to look at what else do we need to protect the man on the foot, on the ground. Secondly, what do we need to put in place to improve his capability, his capacity, since it is also required to be more operational than merely peacekeeping? So these are some of the questions that we must be able to address in the military sector. So we may need the capacity to be able, electronic capacity to deal with the IEDs. We may need armor capacity to protect the soldiers. We may need helicopters to provide better strike capability for the ATMIS. Politically, there are two questions that we must be able to quickly address. First is the question of the fact that 2018, a constitution was drafted in Somalia. As we speak, it has not yet been promulgated. And as a result of that, the question of division of responsibilities between the federal government and the state governments remains something that has not been resolved. And I think if we must have a Somali that is peaceful and stable, that question has to be quickly resolved as well. We need to engage with the Somali authorities to be able to help them overcome that challenge. Now, along with that internal problem, the other additional problem that I now see is the involvement of other partners in Somalia. Turkey, Qatar, UAE. They are most welcome. But what I see, and I see as a challenge, is that there is no synergy between these other partners in as far as the Somali question is concerned. And I hope in the very near future, we will get into a conversation in which all of us will be able to build synergies towards building a stable and peaceful Somalia. The third question, which in my view needs to be addressed, is the fact that Somalia has had 4 continuous years of failed rain season. This in itself has now created the challenge of famine and the challenge of desperation among the population. Hungry people cannot be able to listen to anything else before their stomachs are full. So we must also, going forward, critically look at how we can help them in that sector.
Yeah. As you've rightly said, the famine is truly terrible, and it's not just Somalia, of course. It's throughout other parts of the region as well. I wanted to dig in a little bit on this issue of the political question, which I think you're exactly right about in Somalia. The tension between the federal government and the federal member states has caused a lot of problems. including armed confrontations among various politicians' affiliated clans. There was a famous moment, or maybe an infamous moment, where a Ugandan general actually had to mediate. He was there with AMISOM, and he actually mediated between some of the factions that were facing off. The other challenge we've had is this tension between the president and the prime minister over, the various roles and responsibilities and rights that come with each office. So, do you feel confident that Hassan Sheikh, who was just reselected as president, can make progress on these political issues, particularly because he was in power, of course, once before and had these same sorts of political problems while he was in power. So, how do you see the prospects tackling these political problems moving forward?
I think President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud has got a lot of good intentions. Only last month he was in Kampala, and I can speak with confidence because I had an opportunity to have conversations and interactions with him. I think he needs our support. He's very clear about the challenges that he is faced with. He is very clear about the limitations that he faces. So I think I have a lot of confidence. I have a lot of belief that he's a right person at the right time, and using him, assisting him, I believe we can be able to see good progress and good results in Somalia.
There's currently a major offensive going on against Al-Shabab, and there's been some reported successes. I think without political progress, those battlefield successes will be temporary. An interesting question that someone asked me was, has Uganda or AMISOM more generally ever considered trying to use the Bantu communities that exist in southern Somalia? They're traditionally discriminated against and marginalized in Somali society. Have they ever made any outreach to those communities to try to bring them on board with the fight against Al-Shabaab? Because it seems like you'll need local community support to fully push this community, or to push this group back.
I agree with you that the fight against Al-Shabaab will be in conflict without involvement of the local communities. And I think we should do everything possible to get engaged with the local communities. I think the problem has hitherto been that AMISOM primarily has been in contact only with the federal authorities. And I think we should now begin to see how, with the understanding with the federal government, the central government, we can get involved with the state governments in order to be able to build their capacity, particularly bearing in mind that the ex-soldiers are resident in these states, and they have the capacity to be able to organize, support, and utilize the militias around them. So I agree with you that it is important that we must get down to the states, reach out to these veterans who will be able to help marshal militias that can be able to control the ground in the different areas of the federal states.
Yeah, I think any solution will have to heavily involve local forces. That seems clear. I want to switch focus to another terrorist group that Uganda is involved in fighting, and this is the sort of strangely named Allied Democratic Forces, ADF. This group is probably less familiar to our audience than a group like Al-Shabaab, but ADF is hugely brutal and has been active both in Uganda, but now more in eastern DRC. Could you just tell us a little bit about what Uganda knows about this group? Because it's fairly shadowy. I feel like we don't have a lot of good information on it. What is its goals? What is its general strength? Where does it primarily operate? Any insights there you can give us?
Thank you. Of course, earlier on in the 1995-1996 period, when ADF came into the limelight, it was operating out of Western Uganda. But from about 96, 97, it's been basically resident in Eastern DRC. ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces, is a Muslim extremist outfit. Over the years, it's been able to link up with Al Qaeda, with ISIS. As we speak now, it is basically an ISIS affiliate, but resident in Eastern DRC. Whilst they have been in Eastern DRC, we did not have the opportunity to engage them at the level that we would have desired. They provided us with this opportunity in November last year when they attacked the city of Kampala by way of exploding twin bombs that caused a lot of mayhem and havoc and destruction of property and killing of some people. It gave us the opportunity to have a focus on what needs to be done. Knowing they were in Eastern DRC, we approached the government of DRC to see if we, together with the government of DRC, could get involved in a military operation, hopefully to take out this outfit completely, if we could destroy it, or at least be able to degrade their capacity to create problem, or to prescribe the capacity to create problems in the region. As we speak, that intention on our part has been largely achieved. But it's also important to know that at the time when we initially got involved in Eastern DRC, way back in December 2021, the size of this group was something upwards of 2,500 active fighters, many of whom were mainly children who had been abducted, many of whom were actually young people elsewhere who had got conscripted. But as you correctly pointed out, it is acquiring an international nature, because what we have now discovered is that the fighters are not entirely Ugandan. They are from other parts of the region as well as beyond. The results of the operation that we have been involved in have indicated to us that there is now a new evolution in the manner in which they operate. Initially, they were in concentrations, killing, abducting, looting the populations in Eastern DRC. But as a result of the military operation between ourselves and the forces of DRC, they have now splintered into small groups, and we are looking at how can we now deal with this new phenomenon of terrorists marauding the villages in groups of 5, in groups of 4, in that form. So this is where we are now. But correctly, as you pointed out, this is an Al-Shabab, rather Al-Qaeda, ISIS related outfit, Muslim in nature, extremist in nature, based on an Islamic ideology.
Could you tell us a little bit about it's been linked to the group operating in northern Mozambique, also a very vicious group that kills a lot of innocent people. Could you tell us anything about that relationship and also the relationship, as you mentioned, with ISIS? How close are the bonds? Do they exchange fighters? Do they exchange money? Do they exchange messages? Do you have any sense of the strength of the relationship?
I think we've been able to establish that there is a firm relationship between ADF and the forces operating in northern Mozambique, because we've been able to intercept messages between them. We've been able to arrest couriers in between them. There is also credible evidence, physical and actual, in considering the relationship between ADF and ISIS, because in the camps that we've been able to capture, we've found literature, we have found writings, we have found evidence of instructors from ISIS. So yes, the relationship is strong and firm. It's not an imaginary relationship.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned foreign fighters. So I've seen reports of Tanzanians, for instance, fighting with ADF and others. And you said beyond the region.
Yeah.
So are there non-Africans fighting?
Yes.
Okay, from Middle East or?
Yes, some fighters from the Middle East.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes.
So they probably came from ISIS, or were they recruited independently?
That's what we believe.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Great. Well, we'll keep moving because there's so much to cover here.
Absolutely.
So obviously, one of perhaps the most important or contentious foreign policy issue right now is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the terrible war that's been going on for months there. Uganda, there's been a series of motions at the United Nations that were designed to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Uganda has abstained on all three of those. Could you give us a sense of Uganda's perspective on that war, and then give us an idea of the reasoning behind Uganda's abstentions on those motions?
First of all, we do not agree that war is the best way to resolve any conflict. That goes for the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. We do not agree that fighting is the best way to resolve any conflict. Our preferred option should be a negotiation. It should be an engagement between the parties involved in the conflict. It's the basis upon which we view the manner in which we relate with the international community, we relate with everybody else in as far as the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine is concerned. Uganda is an unaligned country. Next year, 2023, Uganda will take the chairmanship of the non-aligned movement. The basic principle of the non-aligned movement is dialogue, dialogue, dialogue to resolve any conflict in the international arena. So this burden of leadership that we are about to take imposes upon us to demonstrate our leadership of the non-aligned movement, and imposes upon us to lead by example. And we use that bearing in mind our own principle of engaging in order to be able to seek an avenue for dialogue. This has informed our decisions to abstain, because we think in doing that we will be encouraging an opportunity for dialogue.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Dialogue is far preferable to the awfulness of the war and the fighting we've had. That principle, though, how does the principle of seeking dialogue apply in a situation where there's a clear aggressor on one side who is annexing territory and who has clearly rejected dialogue and begun a war. So now calls for dialogue seem as though it would potentially be favorable to the Russian perspective on this, where they say, well, now we've annexed these territories of which used to be part of sovereign Ukraine, and so sure, we're happy to talk about other elements, but they've now sort of staked out these maximalist claims. So when you have a clear aggressor and a party that has rejected dialogue, how does the dialogue principle that you just outlined, which is absolutely admirable, how does that apply in that situation?
First of all, talking about boundaries and territories, I think we are absolutely agreeable that in Africa, we do not agree with the boundaries that exist amongst our countries. But we are also cognizant of the fact that to reopen a debate on the boundaries is to open a Pandora box. So we are happy to live with the boundaries as we found them. Similarly, applying that same principle, it would be good if that same understanding could be applied in as far as Ukraine and Russia is concerned. So yes, we do not agree that it is correct for Russia to annex. We do not agree that the method they are using is the correct method, but we also are insistent on the fact that under the circumstances, to continue to deny them the opportunity of engagement may be an avenue for exacerbating this conflict, because they may have the feeling that, after all, we have been ostracized, we have been left alone. We therefore will be in a position to do anything that we want. We want to believe them, want to believe that they must continue to be involved and engaged in order for our voice, for our perspectives, in as far as this conflict is concerned, to be listened to and to be heard.
Yeah, thank you for that. And final question on this: is there any action that might change that Russia could take that might change Uganda's stance at the UN? So, for instance, what are the red lines for Uganda if Russia used tactical nuclear weapons, for instance, which has been there's a lot of concern around that possibility right now. Would that change Uganda's perspective on this?
And I think for us, we are certainly concerned. Any further escalation of the conflict is a red line for us. Escalation in terms of spatial, escalation in terms of the intensity and the type of equipment involved is a red line for us.
Okay. So I want to move a little bit away from security issues and talk a little bit about trade. And sure. Of course, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has been in the works for some years now. This would be, for our listeners who are unfamiliar, this would be a free trade agreement that encompasses the entire continent. A number of countries have ratified the protocols around it. Could you just give us an update on the progress of both getting all countries, all 54, to ratify, and also the progress of implementation of the agreements that countries have already signed on to?
First of all, I think there is a positive progress in as far as the evolution of the African Free Trade Area is concerned. I think as we speak, close to 43 countries have now signed on to it, and we are still counting. We hope that soon all may be able to sign onto it. What is impressive is that most of what we would call the big economies of Africa have signed onto this. The opportunities that Africa's free trade area bring on board is a one market. For those interested to trade with Africa, the difficulties of having to go from one border to the other, the different taxation, the tax customs, and so on, will now be eliminated. So for us, we look at it as an opportunity to encourage intra-Africa trade, but also an opportunity for people outside Africa to take advantage of, in order to be able to freely move capital, to freely move human labor across the whole continent.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I'm really rooting for the free trade agreement. I think it's a wonderful idea. One of my concerns is there are regional economic communities, of course, on the continent, COMESA, EAC, SADC, and those have never fully integrated to the level that was envisioned when they were formed. Are you confident that this Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is obviously a much more ambitious project than even the regional economic communities, can achieve that integration where the regional economic communities failed?
Well, the intention is that the African Free Trade Area should supersede the regional blocks. The regional blocks have been there for quite some time. It will take a bit of time for them to unwind and embrace the African Free Trade Area. But I am confident that all of them see the value and the advantage of the African Free Trade Area. And I am sure going forward, all of them will make sure that the agreements amongst themselves will incorporate the element of the African Free Trade Area.
Yeah, I certainly hope for a success for the free trade agreement. Yeah, it would be a wonderful thing for the continent.
Thank you.
Could you talk quickly, because we're already starting to get to the end of our time, but talk quickly, if you would, about Eastern DRC. We're going to move back to security issues here. And you've already talked a little bit about it with reference to ADF. But there's so many armed groups in Eastern DRC. M23, of course, is one of the more notorious rebel groups. You have Mai militias and every other sort of flavor of armed group under the sun in Eastern DRC. Uganda has been involved in DRC off and on for decades. As you referenced, most recently returned in 2021. What is it going to take in Eastern DRC to bring some level of stability and development to that region? And then how is Uganda working towards that? What is Uganda's goals in Eastern DRC? And are you making progress towards those goals, would you say?
First of all, thank you very much. It is true, in Eastern DRC, we have a multiplicity of rebel groups. In fact, in my last assessment, the count was 100 and still counting. Yeah. And that, in my view, is extremely disturbing. M23, as you pointed out, has been an on and off major player in the confusion in Eastern DRC, particularly in the Kivu area. But I think it's also important to understand what is the struggle of M23. I think M23 basically, without qualms and without mincing words, are Banyarwanda extraction. But they have lived in Congo for more than 200 years. Their struggle is to be accepted as Congolese and not to be ostracized as Banyarwanda. They must be accepted and they should be integrated in DRC as Congolese. And I think that is their main struggle. For me, that situation in Eastern DRC can be resolved if we give the regional players a more significant role to play. Why? Because in my view, in my understanding, they understand the situation much better. They are the same people across the borders. They have the same cultures. So there is a lot of understanding. I mentioned a short while ago when I was somewhere else that recently, as late as July this year, the East African leaders got together and put into place a structure called the East African Intervention Force, which is now in the state of formation to be able to play a part in silencing the guns in Eastern DRC. But we have also come to realize that military solutions alone may not be the answer to this problem. I think we have come to realize that we must now begin to look at other ways of bringing peace in this region other than military solutions. I am talking about to what extent can we be able to use culture to bring an understanding among the different communities in this region? To what extent can we bring education to bring the different players in this region? To what extent can the women, as a different interest group, bring their expertise, their influence, their become players in finding a solution in Eastern DRC? To what extent can we be able to use the youth to bring benefits to finding a solution in the Eastern DRC? We are also now looking at to what extent can joint infrastructure programs between the different states in that part of the region, the Great Lakes, including Eastern DRC, to what extent can joint infrastructure development programs be able to engender peace in this region? For example, Uganda and DRC are now involved in a joint infrastructure development to build roads in the Kivu region. We are now involved in building 223-kilometer infrastructure, 221-kilometer road infrastructure in Eastern DRC. The thinking behind this is that the infrastructure will be a peace dividend. It will be able to create an appetite for the communities to ensure that peace and stability will continue for them to be able to benefit from this infrastructure development. It will be something they will own and have a reason to protect, and in so doing, ensure that peace, stability, and security prevails in the region.
Yeah, I remember, I still remember the shock I experienced when, many years ago now, I learned that estimates for the number of lives lost in the Congolese wars, maybe 4 million, maybe even 5 million.
Mm-hmm.
It's the costliest conflict in terms of lives lost since World War II. And I suspect there's not many people in the world, outside of Africa probably, who even are that cognizant of that fact, of just how costly the war has been, wars, I should say, in DRC. So we certainly hope and pray for peace and stability there. So we're very nearly to the end of our time here. I wanted to note that we're coming up on the 60th anniversary of U.S.-Uganda diplomatic ties and, of course, Ugandan independence. So a big milestone. And
Right.
Just very briefly, tell us what we in the United States should understand about Uganda. Like, help us understand your country a little bit better here in the next 2 or 3 minutes. It's a tall task, I know,
Right.
but what do we need to know, and what do we get wrong about Uganda?
First of all, thank you very much for raising that question. I think what is important to know is that Uganda is the pearl of Africa. Uganda is the center. I keep telling people that Uganda is uniquely placed. if you took a journey from the north, Alexandria, and you came down to Kampala, it is the same distance from Kampala to Cape Town. Now, if you took a journey from the east coast, Mombasa, to Kampala, it's the same distance from Kampala to Port Nua. So we are so centrally placed. And anybody interested in doing anything in Africa would better come to Kampala, come to Uganda, because you can be able to radiate to any part of Africa with ease. But having said that, Uganda is also a dynamically growing and evolving country. We are involved in ensuring that our democracy matures. We are ensuring that our economy grows, and this is where we look at the partnership that we've had with the United States for the last 60 years, being able to continue to play an important role. I think time has come for us to now begin to have conversations, not necessarily around donor assistance, but conversations around trade partnerships, conversations around investment partnerships, conversation around growth in tourism, in order to be able to bring in benefits to the communities in Uganda so that they should shed off the dependence mentality.
Well, I can personally attest to the beauty of Uganda. I've been fortunate to visit several times. I told you earlier I went whitewater rafting in Jinja and had a wonderful time. I came out pretty waterlogged. I think I swallowed a fair amount of the river, but it was a great trip, and I highly recommend it to any viewers who want to go visit.
Can everybody come to Uganda, please?
There's a free tourism plug for you, but it is heartfelt. Uganda is a beautiful country, and
Sure.
We really appreciate your time here this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. Safe travels as you head back tomorrow, I believe, and we hope that you'll come visit us again and consider us friends here at the Heritage Foundation.
I want to say thank you very much. I have had a wonderful, wonderful time in the U.S., particularly here in Washington, because I've been able to talk to colleagues and friends in Pentagon, friends in State House, friends from White House, particularly in as far as our relationship regarding epidemics is concerned. I have been able to talk to friends in the business world, Boeing and others. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful time indeed being here for the last 8 days. I look forward to continuing this kind of conversation, this kind of relationship, and I believe that is the only way forward. Indeed, I will be coming back very soon, and I would like to continue these conversations and these relationships and partnerships. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you a few views about my country and the region.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister.
My pleasure indeed.
And thank you to everyone for joining us online.